So we're just slowly getting going here. And I'm sure you've heard the results of the election, which is that Amber Budden will be leading this group.
Okay.
What?
I have not heard that, but that's a good one.
Okay. Unfortunately, she couldn't make the meeting, and I was hoping she would. So far, not done that. But the community decided that they needed to do some planning because we hadn't done that for a long time. We just had a lot of things happening. So I thought it would be good to recap some of those and then start talking about, what we want to do over the next year.
That sounds good. Along that line, do you know who might be the co-chair?
I'm sorry, but you were too soft for me to understand.
So you're asking about who will be the co-chair, is that right?
Yeah.
So at this point, after Amber is instated, there will be another opportunity for nominations. And sorry, if other people are interested, Megan has suggested we have an election. Otherwise, it will continue being Kelsey.
Right. I do note that Kelsey actually just started here not that long ago. So it would be nice to let her have a full year.
But some of that will be up to Amber once she starts, exactly how that process might look.
Yep, exactly. So
she will be for 2 years. I'm sorry. She will be for 2 years or just another year? Just for 1 year.
Right. And actually, this is silly for me to stand up in front and speak in this speaker. I can just sit over there with you and use the
use the handheld. And I'll drag this mic over here so we can have a second one moving around. Oh, it's taped. No luck. If you guys are interested in taking part in the planning meeting, I would love if we moved a little closer together. So that right along these edges is great too. So that right, so I can run a little bit closer. Would you mind being a note taker? I think that would probably be great. Yes. Will you share it with me once it's up? Here, let me hand this to you.
Are you going to take notes? Great. Okay, so we do have a notes document, and they're putting it in the session description. So hopefully, if you refresh your screen here in about a minute or so, you can get to it. Well, while that technology is getting all set up, let's talk about the committee and the various things that have happened this year. I don't know that everybody who's here right now know that this committee is kind of an umbrella group for a whole bunch of clusters, including data quality, research objects. I forget what other clusters are. Oh yeah, the clearinghouse. I don't have a list in front of me and I have no memory. So data rescue. Yeah. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of them. And most of these groups actually had some outputs for this year. In fact, I know of 3 papers that got published, one on the present and future of data citation, one on The data risk matrix, that isn't actually officially published yet. It's available as a preprint, I think, by now, but it has been submitted. And then there was, oh yes, I forgot about the return on investment of repositories. That paper has actually been published now. So there have been 3 papers that came out. Is what? Oh, okay. So those are sort of the activities that happened over the past year. What we have talked about in the recent past is trying to ensure that data stewardship issues and data repository issues are showing up in the schema.org. Join us up front because we're a small group and we're doing planning. Yes, pretty pleased with sugar in it. Except we just talked about last year's accomplishments, so that's, oh well. Anyway, trying to get the data management perspective into the schema.org guidelines and recommendations for repositories is what we were talking about as something that this group should do over the next year. It's become painfully obvious that if one just has the technical people who don't understand what the best practices are and what's feasible, define your requirements and technologies, that might not necessarily be a good thing. So I'm wondering if people in the room agree that over the next year, the idea will be to participate by reviewing the documentation and issues as they arise from the .org cluster. Well, I see at least one head nodding yes. 2 heads. Right. Exactly. And commenting and creating issues when you see that there's something missing. Okay. I think that sounds like a done deal. Kind of hard to judge.
So it's not that I'm ignoring you, it's just that I don't have an opinion. I'm glad I could have the microphone to say I don't have an opinion.
What we had talked about doing was doing it on the calls. So going through the document kind of, section by time and talking about it. So yeah, it's just the monthly call. Okay, all right. All right.
I'm wondering if we have any more specifics around what that really looks like, because I've spent literally 0 time with schema.org, so I have no idea what I'd be agreeing to.
Okay, so
People outing themselves is
okay. I guess I could go back up front. Or could you bring up this?
So if you refresh the session page, it should be on the screen. I think that's true, yeah. Okay.
It's an issue of sharing.
I think only Ruth has the permissions to
What?
share.
I didn't even create it.
Because it's in the eSIP drive.
Okay.
Maybe we should
Share.
use the
Hold on,
notes document.
Hold on. I can do it. Share.
I believe.
Share. Who has access?
Would folks be up for talking about what brings them to the data stewardship meeting? Like what's exciting to you that brought you into this room? Because I'm very curious about it.
Okay, link sharing is on.
That can be popcorn style.
Also getting access denied up here.
Why are you entering?
So I'm Rose Borden. I will be starting a job at Sandia National Labs on Monday. Thank you. Doing, I don't know exactly what yet, but broadly data management for a geophysical research group. And so I'm still trying to figure out where in ESIP exactly would be the most relevant stuff for my job. So I thought this sounded pretty relevant.
And she has the right training materials.
Cool.
So I'm Jeff Arnfield, branch, doing at this point a lot of capacity planning and data management planning within NCI for our holdings, and end up dealing with lots of data providers and some other duties as assigned. But I wanted to see what was going on in the stewardship committee, because stewardship is kind of what we do. There was an interesting talk yesterday where somebody was talking about software sustainability. And his observation was it's difficult to get scientists to understand the value of software engineering, but you can drop that phrase and say it's difficult to get whether it's scientists to understand the value of data stewardship, or developers to understand the value of data stewardship, or pick whoever it is. We all have different parts of the same problem where nobody really understands that what we do is important and it's kind of have to be done. So I'm hoping there's some things here we can leverage as part of a community practice to give some credence to what we're going to tell people to do anyway. Deb, I'm going to hand you the microphone.
He's been trying to help me the entire meeting.
Well,
Thanks, Jeff.
not everybody got an introduction, I gotta say.
Well, I came in late, so I don't deserve one.
That was not mansplaining, that was just proving that.
So I'm Deb Agarwal. I'm at Berkeley Lab. We have a fairly recent repository called ESS Dive that's Department of Energy, Environmental Systems Science. All projects within that space are going to be required to be submitting their data there. And we already have a lot of those projects starting to submit their data there. And having both followed a prior archive and second, been very embedded in the community, so I really care about making sure that the community comes along with us on the repository, has forced me to look at all of the different rules and emerging standards and emerging pieces and try to make pragmatic decisions out of each of them. And that's often led me to be at odds with common knowledge practice, with what should be done. And I'm trying to figure out where I should show up to try to impact some of that common knowledge and convince people to move. Because I do find when I talk to each individual who's been involved in this and say, well, here's why I chose something different. And they go, oh, that makes sense. But so it's clear that some of my use cases aren't in the rooms. And so, but I also can't come to 10 new meetings a year. So I have to figure this out, but I'm giving it a shot to figure out where I'm supposed to show up.
Yeah, my name's Tom Ryan. I also work at NCI. I actually do preliminary appraisals of data that are submitted before they're passed on to the actual data managers. And, one of the things I was doing yesterday morning was I got a submission where there's data from 37 different wells, and they get a landing box for all of them, but not geospatial coordinates for the individuals. And so, so I had to go back to him and say, hey, please, provide. So that's the kind of thing you'd think would be common knowledge. Data practices that he submitted 8 files. 4 of the files had well in column 1 and date in column 2, and 4 had date in column 1 and well in column 2. You would think that, you put a date, always put it in column 1. So that's one of my jobs. My other job is I work with Don Collins on developing SOPs and training material. And then the last thing I do is, before the fundamental principle of our archive is that nothing becomes publicly available without a second person's review. And so what I do is I go through and I review. When somebody thinks they're done with it, I review it and either publish it, push the button, publish button, or I say, there's these areas that need to, be fixed. So, I'm always interested in all sorts of things around data management.
Hi, Nancy Hobline, Acknowledge Motifs, LLC. I'm interested in this committee mostly because my background has been in library and archives, and specifically focused on metadata and preservation. And so that's both from my background is, I say, been library, so it's been bibliographic to start with. But since '09, I've started working with geospatial data. And so I'm continued to be interested in those issues, but also issues related to communicating, again, that as others have said, the kind of principles of data management, but the practical implementation of those principles and best practices, and also education about, so I've been focused in the last little while on the Data Management Training Clearinghouse, which is collecting resources about data management and skill building. But it occurs to me as what I'm hearing that might be something useful for us to work on is gathering up ways of expressing best practices in specific either disciplines or with different data formats and that sort of thing as a practical thing we could be doing. And I know that Data One is collecting those kinds of things too. So Amber may well be interested in that. And it would be something that, if we have come up with the template. One of the things we did that started the clearinghouse in 2012 was this whole idea that Ruth started too, started this idea of short courses that we could create. And I think you created one too for us, right? When I saw your name, yeah. So those have been, those are out of date. Some of them are out of date now and some are not. They're very generic and the field has moved a little bit more. But identifying what issues and what best practices might be useful, coming up with a simple template for how to create those might be something we could do this year as well. That would kind of move stewardship forward and hit some of our interests. So, thoughts?
Hi, I'm Alexis. I am a grad student at George Mason University, and I'm the community fellow for the Data Stewardship class committee. And my interest areas are primarily data rescue, data at risk, physical object stewardship, and moving more and more towards thinking about citizen science data management, citizen science data concerns, and everything that comes with that.
Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm at the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. I am currently, or maybe as of Monday, not anymore, the co-chair of the committee, but that doesn't mean a whole lot yet. And I got involved with ESIP because we've been working on data stewardship practices within EDGI. Those of you who've been around ESIP for longer might be aware of the Stronger Together paper that came out that I think was a pretty strong critique of my organizations. I say our broadly because I wasn't there at the time, but our methods on coming in to save. We did this. Trump got elected, and then people were frightened and wanted to spend their time working on saving something from a government they were afraid of. And so all of this energy got brought together in these rooms where people were saving the websites and largely onto the Internet Archive. And this was being done by folks without a lot of data management practice for the most part. And folks from here had a critique that said, hey, well, why don't you ask, like, it's very frustrating that you're doing this thing that isn't well informed by, the decades of practice that there are in the industry on what you're doing. And that's a very valid critique and one that I totally feel when similar things come up when I'm like, hey, wait, there's an entire field here. Why aren't you using it? So I'm here to kind of create that connection. And it's a bit odd because we're definitely not doing as much direct archiving as we were. We now occasionally have folks come up to us and say, hey, this very at-risk thing happened. Like earlier like I think April last year, there was a chemical fire in Texas, and the people who were holding the data were also the people who might be legally culpable for failing to monitor the air quality properly, and that was the data. And they said, okay, we need to save this, and it might be legal for a decade. And we're like, oh, well, that's bad. Someone should definitely save it. I guess it's us because you asked, but we don't like have repositories. So I'm not totally sure where I'd like this data stewardship group to go, but I'm interested in hearing what the different problems are in that space, and a lot of what Alexis was talking about around citizen science and data rescue and data at risk is very relevant to the stuff that we look at and think about basically constantly. Well, if you're resource constrained, if you're time constrained, if you're trying to solicit input from the public, what do you actually do to make intelligent decisions? And that does not scale down well to I'd like to do this year, but should we go to
Online folks, Denise, Peng, Jeff, would you guys like to do quick introductions and what you like about or why you're interested in the Data Stewardship Committee?
Okay, if nobody else is going, my name is Go Peng. I'm a scientist at a corporate institute between NOAA and CEI at NC State. I have been participating, associated with the Data Stewardship Committee since I came to ESIP summer meeting 2014. As people have noticed that, pointed out, there's a difficulty, a gap between the data managers and the data scientists and how to convey the data quality information. So my work primarily focusing on the bridge that gap between the data managers and the scientists, as well as developing and providing a more structured and structured framework to help data managers to curating data quality information. I'll leave for that.
Hi, I'll go next. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Denise Hills, Geologic Survey of Alabama. I've been involved with the Data Stewardship Committee since I first got involved with ESIP. You know, my main interests are kind of with legacy data and physical samples, but I'm also very involved with the dataAtRisk.org. I'm very interested in you know, doing the assessment for you know, what data is at risk, how to prioritize, all of that, and capturing kind of the data rescue and data conservation stories so that we can all learn from each other.
Hello, this is Jeff Campbell. Anybody hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm with USDA National Agricultural Library. General focus is in scientific data management and currently specifically geospatial metadata cataloging, things along those lines. And you can have a wonderful catalog, and unless somebody is actually keeping the data somewhere and it can be found, or you know the link doesn't keep changing, the stuff that we're doing isn't terribly meaningful. I guess that's a rather poorly phrased explanation. I guess the real thing is I wanted to find out what the data stewardship group was actually focusing on and doing.
Well, you get to help set that agenda because that's the point of today's meeting.
Okay.
So, so far we've talked about the 3 papers that came out of the various clusters last year. There's the ongoing work in the research object citation group. We briefly talked about the issue that the community is moving towards wanting to have schema.org metadata in landing pages for data sets, and how the committee thought it was important that the data repositories and data managers got a chance to weigh in on what the technical people are suggesting, because they're not making suggestions based off data management experience and what the repositories can actually do. They're making, recommendations based on technologies. And so the idea was to look at the guidance documents that are coming out from that group, and then see if there are things that need to be changed, updated, whatever. And the question was, how would we do that? And the answer seemed to be we would pick a section or an issue every month and spend 20 or 30 minutes on that in the regular monthly calls. And so there was a question of, what does this mean and why would I care? I note that I held a 2-day workshop in Helsinki for the Polar Data Managers. It's a third Polar Data Forum. And they at first were had the same question, why should we care? Why isn't it good enough for us to just vet the results? And then they started walking through the document, and then after the first 3, they never got past like the 3rd sentence before they started to see problems with implementation ability, whether it was even understandable so that a data manager would understand what it means, and that sort of thing. And so that group ended up disrailing my workshop, and we spent, instead of learning all about semantics, we spent the rest of the workshop, a day and a half, wading through this document right here, this one about data sets, and commenting on it. And there's like 20 or so issues of things that community thought needed to be done. Well, that community is the polar data community. That's not all of Earth science. And so, there's this, if you don't cross the technology to data gap, that could be a problem. The whole reason why people are saying, oh, schema.org, it's a great thing, is because it enables discovery. Well, we know from the past that, you can say things like, well, we have ISO 119, 115, whatever, the metadata, but everybody's implementing it differently. They're using different fields to have the same thing. They're maybe putting different things, and so from that standpoint, it didn't actually help the can we find it, can we use it question, at least from a can we have a machine do that for you so you don't have to. And so my hope is that having the data people weigh in the front, and so that there's common agreement to, we're going to use this field for this reason with these values, will help that problem, so that maybe in the future we don't have so much of an issue with this. And so that was the reason why I'm interested in this. Because it was obvious to me that if we didn't even get through the document after a day and a half, because there was so much discussion and we had to write so many issues. It was quite amazing to me. Please.
So what were the perspectives of the people there? Were they mostly coming from a repository point of view? Were they coming from a search engine optimization point of view? From a discovery metadata point of view? I mean, if we do those kinds of conversation or do that kind of assessment ourselves in the data stewardship committee, then I mean, what is your thought that we would comment based on our experiences and different use cases, or how would we do it other than go through the document?
I don't know that there is any way to do anything different other than a document, because the schema.org cluster that is currently active here is full of techies. And getting them to understand that, for example, governance does not imply, we're going to use GitHub and issues and that sort of thing, but, might include things like, how does one get the larger community to determine, whether these things are important or needed? And so I think walking through the document is the only way that we have to communicate with these guys and writing up issues, because they don't understand anything else.
Well, so what the group that you worked with on that day and a half, where are the results of those discussions, and who were those people is what I guess I was asking.
Okay, so this was at the 3rd International Polar Data Forum. And so we're talking about all the polar data repositories and all over the world, from Australia and Finland and Greenland and all over the place. And so that community realized that they really needed to participate. And at this point, the only way to participate is to actually write up issues in GitHub, which I thought was perhaps not always the best route, but seems to be the only route that we're going to be able to do.
I see that Denise has to go soon, and so before she heads out, I did want to bring something up that's like adjacent but related. So at AGU, I was the only attendee at a session about how to find a repository, and Denise and I think Shelley and I were talking yesterday a bit about how, even though there are projects all the time about how to find the right repository for your data, they aren't necessarily always helpful or in a format that's useful to people that are looking for places to put their data. So that seemed like something relevant to data stewardship to be thinking and talking or putting together something as a resource or tool to help researchers and maybe help publishers suggest repositories to researchers who are looking for, where do I put my data? This is how big it is. This is kind of what it is. And this is what I need from my repository, but then having a way to connect them to repositories and connect publishers to repositories to suggest.
So I note that the Go Fair, or whatever the AGU Fair thing was, spent a lot of time coming up with a very complete flow diagram of how you make those choices that was trying to be implemented in RA3 data, but they didn't have enough funds to do it, which means that a lot of the information that you need is not in that data system.
Right. Denise says RE3 data repo finder is not good, but could be a good starting point with crosstalk from publishers.
Right. The question is I'm not sure this committee could, unless somebody in this committee has deep pockets, I don't know how to fix that problem. It's basically somebody needs to fund a solution so that they can actually add the additional information they need to that.
I wonder, given that this is a planning meeting, I wonder if a way to move forward on all these issues would be to, in some ways, vote on this, not necessarily here, because I think there aren't enough people who are, and a lot of the data stewardship people who have been involved and would be involved on the list, for instance, might want to weigh in. But we've gotten a number of things that have been mentioned that people are interested in. And so I wonder if it makes sense to kind of come up with, an advocate for describing a little bit about each of the issues and suggestions about how, maybe what outcomes might be for the issues that we're concerned about. And then we can send that out to the whole stewardship list. I mean, Amber, obviously can weigh in with anything she wants as well, but, given this, the committee, it's the committee that's in the chair leads a committee, but, doesn't dictate. Maybe that's something we could do with the different suggestions that we've got and figure out, not only which ones we would want to concentrate on, but who might work on it.
I'll give you the microphone right back in a second, but would you be able to list out the ones that you have written down? Because it looks like you have them.
Yeah, although I just had to add what you just said, Denise just said. The first one was data rescue. The second one was what I had suggested, which was working on training, really on different use cases for data stewardship. Data quality, Peng mentioned. I'm not sure, what exactly we could do with that, but maybe we could liaison with the data quality group there. Research object citations, maybe again, there's not much to do there, but that was definitely an issue that came up. Repository focused, maybe comments on the schema.org data set, and then the Denise's suggestion about the repository finder problem, disseminating how to find repositories in some way. Okay. So those are those are that I had. I didn't hear specifically.
So I guess I have one more that I was wishing for that I didn't find, which is best practices for starting a repository. We have such a strong tendency to only create the best practices for those who are going to give us data, but there's a ton of repositories starting up. And if their process looks anything like mine, it's a massive effort to figure out what do you have to do, what do you still have to figure out, what, where are things, what is common practice, so at least you know whether you're bucking the trend. So while I have the microphone, I have a question. It doesn't have to be answered right now because it's off topic for the moment, but on the schema topic, what I don't see here is whether Google is actually involved in this effort, or whether this effort is trying to inform, their effort. Because at the moment, they seem to be the biggest group who's going to use deep pockets to index the schema.org information on all these pages. If we don't have Google involved at some level, it's not obvious to me what impact this has.
So the answer to that question is Google showed up at the third Polar Data Forum, and Google's been here. And in fact, if Adam and Doug and folks like that have been working with the Google folks, the difference is, and there's two levels of discovery. There is a Google search, dataset search, currently active that you can use. But Google will never be domain specific. They will only be sort of the general, discovery mechanism. And that's okay, because they're basing it off the core of schema.org. Now, the core of schema.org can be modified. And in fact, it has been heavily modified for the biological and medical communities who've been very active in the semantic world for, decades. And the geoscience world is trying to work on that. And that's where the science.schema.org and geoschemas.org GitHub repositories come in. And yes, there are those community connections, but there is never the expectation that, really detailed domain-specific search engines will come out of Google. The expectation is that will come out of the domains themselves. For example, the reason why the Polar repositories are interested in this is because there's a lot of them, about 80 on this list that is being maintained, who all want their data to show up in a single user interface that's appropriate to that community. In other words, their polar projections and things like that, that, you know, Google doesn't do well, for example. And so that's their end goal, is to be able to create their own. And you can do that. The ability to crawl for schema.org documentation and to extract and index that is something that stuff all exists already. And so, you know, if you wanted to create a domain specific discovery engine based off schema.org metadata and various extensions that go beyond schema.org, you can do that. Of course, how easy that will be to be done will depend on things like what fields has everybody agreed to use in what exact way, which is why I keep advocating for, let's get the data centers to decide as a whole how best to implement this, because then that will enable these more advanced discovery and access mechanisms. If they don't do that, it'll be just, you know, ISO 19115 again.
In the chat, Denise has something relevant. She says, related, circling back to what you were saying and connecting to this, that identifying not necessarily best practices, but leading practices for implementing DMPs, starting a repository for using schema.org, something related to leading practices for all these different things might be something we could focus on as a cluster.
Is there a need for proliferation of repositories, given that they require sustainment, and the idea of a repository is to have a safe, survivable haven for data? Or are we building and encouraging some additional problems? Because it seems that if there's as many repositories as it looks like there are, we may not be best served by encouraging people to establish their own repository. I mean, it's a separate issue from domain-specific search and catalog, which could use federated repositories where the data actually reside. But this seems like a huge potential for replication of data and for two slightly different versions, one of which may or may not be authoritative. So I don't know how you tell people, God, please don't start your own repository.
So I agree with you totally, but the amount of data that doesn't have a home now is quite large, that where there is no repository. And that is problematic.
Is there no repository due to the nature of the data, or is it too hard to find the existing repositories?
Let me try a different tack on why this proliferation occurs. And it's got more to do with politics, funding, licensing, and ownership. So, you know, I mean, Department of Energy, you know, Environmental System Science wants to make certain that their data gets archived in a place where they can find all of it for within their program. They recognize they have to start one up. Now, many of the people who store in mine also have to store with their institution. You know, I mean, you know, so you look at a huge number of the universities in the world, huge number of the national labs in the world are going to start repositories because licensing aspects, you know, just pure, at some point there's going to be political requirements that say you must, you know, you must archive the data generated in your agency. They're kind of already coming up, right? They're just not strong enough yet to force it. So it's going to force a fairly decent proliferation. I mean, that's like saying there should be one library. Yes, there is Library of Congress, there is, but there's a huge number of libraries that also exist to curate the individual collections that are for their locality. I mean, data is going to be very similar. And I think that, you know, yeah, sure, in an ideal world, we could think that there should be like 10 of them. But I don't.
There may be some guidance for you really need to create your own repository.
But I think that's why I want to see a best practices, because a best practices can point out the level of things you've got to have to be a repository and not just a backup store of something. Because there's a lot of people calling themselves repositories that aren't.
Agreed.
Hey, this is Denise. Yes, 100%. That's why, you know, and one of the reasons, let me tell you why I say leading practices rather than best. Best implies that we know exactly what we're doing and we know that it's exactly right. So I tend to push for leading practices because that also makes it seem more attainable for most people. And I think if we work on that sort of thing, it might actually help address some of those issues that were mentioned about the kind of the duplication of repositories. You know, one of the parts of that leading practice should be, is there already some place that takes this? Is that sufficient? You know, so to kind of help address some of those issues that can come up with proliferation of additional repositories. I also want to make the request because it's often kind of hard to hear even with the mic. If you could please use the mic when you're talking, I would really, really appreciate it because this is really, really interesting to me. And also, at least the first time you speak again after this, could you identify who you are so I know since I can't see you? Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Denise.
And I note that the best practice or leading practice or whatever practice thing was actually called out by these other groups. In fact, if you look at the issues in GitHub, you know, you see the word best practice. That could be leading practice. But the point is that that information isn't coming out currently, and it needs to be attached. You know, what is the best practice for putting a repository name in schema.org, for example? You know, you'd think that that would be straightforward, but it turns out there's issues with all of these things.
Hi, this is Kelsey. So I'm a little bit worried that we're pretty deep in the weeds on basically 2 or 3 issues when we have about 20 minutes left in this session. Till 45. Well, we have more than that. But I would really love for us to be able to talk at a high level about what we imagine thematically for the year. And Nancy, you did a really good job earlier of listing out potential ideas. And I'm trying to figure out ways that we might be able to use the different backgrounds and expertises of everybody in the room in order to try to come up with an interesting challenge space that can engage both the folks here and the folks who end up joining these meetings. I'm wondering, so one of the things that I've been thinking about sort of thematically in the data stewardship space is trying to separate it out by different categories. And I'll tell you mine, but you could use your own. One of them is like the space of identifying what data needs to be archived, which is in the data risk matrix space. This is in the data rescue space. One of them is how do you preserve something well? And that can be future proof, that can be who owns it, that can be licensing. And finally, there's how do you make something accessible? How do you, once you have it in a repo, how do you make it so that anyone can find it again? And I'm wondering if it would be helpful to kind of choose one of those problem spaces to focus down on, or at least categorize things into those challenge spaces to try to come closer to a question that's relevant to all the different folks here.
I do want to say that we don't have to just focus on one question for the year, though. I think we can, because Denise suggested that we also talk about what of these topics can be spun into their own cluster so that we can have working groups specifically working on different parts of these as well. So I think it's great to have an overarching question for this committee, but also thinking about what other work plans can we put together to address some or all of the things we come up with.
Procedural question, and I'll use the microphone, although it's almost not worth it. This is Jeff. How many people typically participate in the stewardship committee? Because there are going to be some really small working groups if this plus the people on the phone are largely the extent.
No, the committee actually has a lot of members.
Oh, good.
But but a lot of them don't show up to all of the actual committee meetings. What tends to happen is the leads of the clusters show up and kind of report on how their activities are going and that sort of thing. And there is a lot of overlap between, attendance at the committee meeting and attendance at various clusters. For example, I haven't been going to the QA stuff because I know that that's well under control. But I've been very interested in the research object citation stuff, so I keep going to that clusters meeting. In fact, I'll be doing that a little later today. So not everything has to be done in the whole group. The real issue is do we have enough brain power to support all, every activity we want to do? And that generally implies it needs to have a champion and at least, one other person who's interested in helping.
I wanted to ask you, Alexis, this is Nancy. Alexis, ask you if you could talk a little bit more about the citizen science aspect to get a sense of what you think the intersection is with what we could do in data stewardship.
Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about what I always want to talk about. So this is Alexis for online. I'm the community fellow for the Data Stewardship Committee. One of my interest areas is citizen science data, and there is a community data cluster, but they're very focused on Flint, Michigan and community problem solving with citizen science data. But I think there is a space for ESIP to be more involved in leading practices for citizen science data metadata. And I think that there are a lot of open questions about attribution and credit for citizen science observers that this community can have a lot of good, helpful input on. We've talked before about some of the challenges in dealing with educational materials that are key inputs into citizen science data sets that aren't always linked well or attributed well or easy to discover from your endpoint. So I think that there is a lot of space for data stewardship input for citizen science. And like so a lot of citizen science projects end up working like their own repository. So there are a lot of these questions are how should we advise new citizen science projects to be stewarding their data, promoting long-term use. There was this horribly sad thing that one of the big citizen science projects on frogs lost funding, shut down. There was no long-term home for the data, and it just sort of disappeared into the ether. Yeah, so I think
is that the repositories are great and might fill a need, but they need to be sustained. And if they're not, then things go awry.
Or integrated into other repositories, especially if the setup works, so it can be easily migrated into a different place. So that's again leading practices. I think we're coming to consensus.
Really good ideas, if we don't want to call them best practices, for things like conventions, formats, naming, packaging, so that it's possible to aggregate or transfer or whatever.
I hesitate to say that iNaturalist is doing everything right, but one of the most right things they're doing is continually moving their data dynamically to the GBIF repository, so that if their data set ever is to disappear into the pond, there is a long-term home for it that is continually updated as their data set's updated. And so finding like what's the best repository of dynamic updating for these different projects, I think is part of that, so that you don't have this duplication of effort, this duplication of storage, but you're also providing similarly structured metadata, useful fields for these different ongoing collection things.
Maybe one way we could work on all of this together is to kind of define some use cases for repositories that we could come up with leading practices for. I mean, there are people in the repository world, not only probably Coptis within ESIP, but also in the library world, who've been working on repositories for a long, long time, and they might have information that we could, cull. But domain, if we have use cases for specific kinds of domain or specific kinds of cases, then we can tailor what really exists, if it exists, or add, where need be. So that might be a way to pull these together. That was Nancy, by the way.
I have a different angle for perhaps a planned work. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is the pain. So kind of go back to the FAIR principles, that there are a number of efforts on coming up assessment metrics or indicators. And I wonder whether it's something can be, at least think about it, is to perhaps review and to see whether they're relevant to earth science data.
That sounds like a great idea. Just because we can't hear you 100% well, you were suggesting that we review some of the implementations of FAIR principles and best practices out of the FAIR principles to see where the overlaps are for earth science?
It's not so much of implementation. It's right now. It's usually in the form of metrics or assessment model or indicator, and review those and potentially thinking about the implementation for our science data.
And on the citizen science front, you can't just limit it to the FAIR principles. You also have to bring the CARE principles into consideration.
That's correct. Perhaps that's something we could, as Data Stewardship Committee or Earth Science Committee, we probably, that's something can bring up along with the quality aspect, because right now the quality is not explicitly addressed.
Yeah, I think that was something that came out of the 2 sessions yesterday, is thinking about quality and thinking about care are really important for citizen science and non-professional Earth observations. Oh yeah.
I can't remember the exact name of the organization, but it's the International Indigenous Data Governance or whatever organization, came up with a set of principles for basically ethically dealing with data that is, comes from the indigenous community or is about the indigenous community. I personally think all of those principles, you could take the word indigenous out and it would work for me. They're important. They're the issue of ethics, basically, and responsibility. And is this a win-win situation? Is collecting this data going to hurt that community? And if so, then it's not very caring. There's a website, which I suppose I could bring up, but you could, CARE.
It's collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics is what CARE stands for.
Right.
Yep. It covers a lot of ground. I think one of the big things we were talking about yesterday was ethics with vulnerable observer populations and ensuring that data collected is used to benefit the community that's collecting it, and sharing of how the community collected data is leveraged by researchers and policymakers are all key to making sure that it's not just like unattributed labor for science.
And it includes principles like, communities have rights to know what's going on in their community. And if they help you like measure their air quality, they need to know what the air quality is. So they get to see the results, not, 12 years later embedded in a scientific paper, but like maybe in real time, and that sort of thing. So, it talks about reciprocity, win-win scenarios, doing things ethically.
One thing that I would love to do over the course of the year, this is Kelsey again, and this is somewhat of a, I don't know, more abstract than a lot of our other ideas, but one thing I would love to see is use cases that you all admire in the space of data stewardship. We often talk about the problems that we encounter and our frustrations with different groups, but I would love to have a body of work that says this is a group that does citizen science really well, and here's the parts that we love about it. And I don't know, just having a set of that resource could be a really inspirational, helpful thing to draw from. Yeah, exemplars. I'm thinking of, for example, I read something in the last year that really embodied this concept of decolonization of data, where it's like a Texas university was working with, I don't remember which indigenous group in Mexico it was, but it was about having them hold and own their data, but with support from folks who have a lot of experience maintaining collections, this sort of thing. And I was just like, oh, that's really neat. Like, I didn't know that existed. And I'm guessing that you all have encountered data stewardship practices that you really admire in the context where they are. And I think that'd be really cool to see. I wanted to bring in, sorry, I don't know your name in the back, but I wanted to make sure you had a chance to join our circle.
No, I don't really have. My name is Alfreda Hall. I'm from the ESIS project. So I guess, we do data. So I'm just sitting in, so nothing in particular. Well, in terms of the, data stewardship, I'm part of the ESIS project, which system engineer on that particular group. So we do, anything from ingest, archive, and distribution. So I was just in here, not anything in particular, but just kind of listening and seeing what I can gather, and if we need to bring anything to the table. So sorry I'm late, but I was.
What is the project you're involved in?
As this project was the Earth Science Data Information System project, we manage all of the, pretty much all of the EOS related satellite data and distribution for NASA. Yeah.
Erin, we skipped you too for the, why do you care about this committee if you want?
This is Erin Robinson. I was curious what's going on. I mean, as ESIP staff, I just wanted to be here and be supportive. I think that the links that Ruth has been making and others have been making around the data stewardship to the scienceonschema.org is really interesting. And I think also this idea about, what are data stewardship practices that we admire? I think that's a great idea for kind of following on Sky Bristol's comments around how do we do data for good within ESIP. So it just listening and learning.
I do want to make sure that we didn't miss what Peng was suggesting. So I hope that was somewhere in the notes that we look at the metrics and indicators.
Yes. I just got a new comment. I think that though, kind of following on Peng's idea around fair metrics, one of the things that Peter Fox has brought up a couple of times that I would be nice to capture here is around fair readiness levels, or how fair is your data, and so that kind of quantifying fairness. And I know that there's been work that's happened in several places that we might pull in here, but just putting that out to the group as something that I think the community is interested in.
Okay. Do you want to read the list
Yeah, that would be great.
again?
Okay. Oh, okay. Uh, Data rescue. Let's see, I'm going to fold this. I'm going to, based on what the conversation we've had, we've talked about developing leading practices for both data stewardship, possibly for
Repositories.
repositories, thank you. And a couple, anyway, just, what was the other one? Oh, starting a repository, yeah, that was it. But also, yeah, those two things, if not more. I mean, if we decide we want to do leading practices, then we might want to generate a list of what we would want to work on and do it that way. Data quality was another one. That was, again, that was more of a liaison. Research object citations was more of a liaison. The citizen science was kind of folded into leading practices, I think, mostly. Working on disseminating information about the repository finders. That might also be a leading practice. There's also, let's see, that we did. Oh, the other issues that were mentioned for data, for leading practices or best practices were data management plans using schema.org. Then there was the concept of documenting or help working on implementation of FAIR principles in terms of focus on metrics or indicators or readiness levels. And then also looking at what we do from kind of an abstract point of view, of identifying what the data, what data needs to be preserved, I think you said, Kelsey. How to preserve the data and how to find the data again. So those were overriding principles that fit within, but those are the ones I had collected from what we said.
Okay. I have to say that sounds like a lot and way more than 1 year's worth of activities.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I suggested that we kind of have champions for each of these things, write up a little bit about what we think could be done, and then send it out to the group and see what happens. I mean, and finding champions, as you say.
Yeah, obviously I'm going to champion the schema.org one because I think that's immediate. If we don't do something now, the repository data management world won't have a say in it. And the connections are right now. So I'm willing to champion that one and I'll write that one up.
Okay.
I'll, of course, champion science.
Go ahead.
Pang, does that sounds like you? Is that you?
Yeah, somebody else was going to talk, so.
No, go ahead. You're on.
Okay, so I'm involved in the RDA FAIR data working group. They come up the indicators for FAIR data, and I will be looking into testing their indicators, and I can be a champion for that and report back to data stewardship committee.
Cool.
Okay, sounds good.
3. How many more are there?
There's the repository finder. I can do the leading practices. I'll write that up and write down the suggestions. And then there was repository finder. Is Denise still on? Do you want to do that one? We can tell her. We can nominate her. Yeah, that's true. Asking, you're right.
Actually, there's a little bit of, so when that project was going on, a pretty detailed decision tree of how to make that decision was vetted through a larger community. We need that apparently never went, it was never published, I guess, so we need to find that. And I think that would be a good starting point.
I think that was part of the Enabling FAIR project.
Yes.
So we can definitely make those connections. And Michael Witt was part of it. Shelley Stahl, of course. And then I forgot the other person, maybe Martin Finner, whoever was. Anyway, we can certainly find that.
Yeah, actually, I spent a long time drawing it up.
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere it exists. I can go find it.
Yeah, so maybe it means a form of a paper, form of a
right.
tutorial, something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Sounds like a community fellow job to write some of these things up and send it out to the group and check with Amber to see if she wants to add anything and Does that sound
Sounds great to me.
okay?
I wonder, and maybe it's just not in this group. I mean, I think Amber has a sort of a data management training and data education focus. Did that come up in this conversation today too? So there's a topic. Cool.
Nancy's in the room, so yeah. Okay, we're adding to the list, focus on training. Training and data management education. And one of the things that was happening in the education workshop the other day was the teachers discussing that it's difficult for them to find good data sets in easy to use repositories to use in their classrooms. I don't know if this is necessarily the right committee for that problem, but thinking through connecting curriculum to data in repositories, I think is a need.
As someone who took over a repository that had a data set, well, set of data sets, it was heavily used in classrooms as we learned. That's another good best or leading practices thing would be when you move a data set, what needs to, be maintained as a way to make sure that people can continue to get to it. Because those decisions were really tough, because as technology in repository space moves, it means that generally you're completely reformulating the data and the package to fit with modern technology, and thinking about how do you maintain the accessibility for those curriculums that all had links to the old one.
To Kelsey's point earlier, I think when we're developing these leading practices, it would be really great to say, and here is someone who's doing it really, really well. So this is a leading practice, and this is a exemplar of that practice.
I will say a counterpoint to the exemplars space is at any one point in time, I'm positive we can find an exemplar for any one of these things. And the chance that that needs updating within 3 years is really high. So I would be a little careful about how far we're going to go down this space, because one, you're going to have members of this group lobbying to be the exemplar. But also it's going to be a maintenance nightmare, and it's likely to become that when you look back at the thing 3 to 5 years from now, you go, oh my God, that is never what I would recommend. So we want to be careful thinking about that.
Or at least date stamp it with an expiration date.
Yeah.
As of blah, probably not true after blah.
I definitely agree that you don't have the same organization doing the same things right for a lot of years in a row. I like the idea of having the story exist as an independent entity and say this is a time and a place where a thing was done right. It shows that it's possible to do it in that way.
Okay, so when are we supposed to end?
Yeah, until 45.
12:45? So 12 minutes, in other words. Okay, just checking. So are there other thoughts at this point? I think we have quite an extensive list. We have a few people identified for some of them, about half, I think. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
We already have data quality and research object citation leaders. That was on the list, and it's not exactly something that falls underneath the umbrella.
Yeah.
DELI and quality too, to some extent, but yeah.
I guess I do have a question, which is, are there any particular outputs that we're excited about or attached to at this point? Or are we really just exploring the idea space, or medium? The medium between those would be like, would whoever's championing them propose a place to get to?
Yes, I think whoever's championing them puts together some sort of outcome they're excited about. But I think there's a clear one for schema.org. The outcome is closing some of these and opening new ones.
Yes, hopefully getting all the ones that say things like best practices or documentation needed closed and fixing any other issues that repositories come up with.
And traditionally, that's what we've done here, is to, try to come up with outcomes or products. So I think that should be something that as you say, the leaders of the champions try to solicit or express, and then that can be discussed by the whole group after, if it's accepted.
Okay.
Any other online comments, thoughts, suggestions?
Okay. Well, we might be done 10 minutes early. Yeah, actually, this was good. We have a lot. Wow, we have years worth of work left.
But we have years of time.
Right.
God willing.
Well, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye, Ping.